going to jump right into the message. We're covering a lot of ground today. Remember, we got to do 10 chapters in 8 weeks. This is week 5. And so I thought, man, we've done 1 chapter a week. We got to pick up the pace. If we weren't in a time crunch, because some revival starts in just a few weeks at the end of June. And so if we're in a time crunch, this was going to be 2 messages probably, if not 3. And so essentially what I'm going to do for you today is preach 3 sermons and call it 1. And so as typically I read the entire passage up front, but because it's 2 full chapters and a lot, they're kind of 3 different scenes, I'm going to read the first section. We'll talk about it, preach that sermon, read the second section, preach that sermon, read the third section, preach that sermon. And so I'll ask you to stand as we read the first few verses. For the others, you can keep in your seat when we get there. But let's read Esther 5, 1 through 8. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now, what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this: if the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet. I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word. Ask that you open up your word to our hearts and open up our hearts to your word. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated while you're sitting down. Tell somebody it's hot in here. It is, and I apologize. We found out this week we have an AC out in this room, so getting quotes and all that this week. ACs run about $25,000, so if you feel led, and I'm only half joking, let the Lord use you this week. If you don't want to be hot next week. No, I'm just joking. I'm just kidding, kind of. Well, it's been a couple of weeks. Let's review the first 4 chapters of the book of Esther quickly. You remember in chapter 1, we meet the king, Xerxes. This is the kingdom of Persia, historical kingdom of Persia, one of the greatest empires in all of history. And we meet Xerxes, the king, in chapter 1. We also meet his wife, Vashti, who he gets upset with and essentially fires her. He deposes her as queen. And so that leaves him a little bit lonely by the time we get to chapter 2. When he sobers up and calms down, he starts thinking about his wife, and yet he's banished her. So he goes on to find another wife named Esther. She becomes the queen of Persia, one of the queens of Persia. I do believe Xerxes had many wives, concubines, and the like. The other thing we see in chapter 2 is that Mordecai, another primary character with Esther, Esther's big cousin, he uncovers a plot from a few of the king's advisors to assassinate the king. And we read at the end of chapter 2, verse number 23, that all of this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. That brings us to chapter 3. You would think that Mordecai would be honored. You would think he'd get a promotion. However, he's forgotten about. and someone else is honored, somebody by the name of Haman. Now, Haman's an important name. We're going to talk a lot about Haman today, and next week we'll see the end of Haman's story. But at the beginning of chapter 3, Haman is made essentially number 2 in the kingdom of Persia. He's made the prime minister of Persia, for lack of a better term. Haman has the respect, the fear, and the honor of just about everybody in the kingdom except for Mordecai. Mordecai won't bow to Haman, and so Haman overreacts, and instead of just dealing with Mordecai, he gets the king to pronounce a decree that all of Mordecai's people, the Jewish people in the empire, should be annihilated, should be destroyed. And so as we get to chapter 4, Mordecai is upset. He's grieving. He's out in the city square in sackcloth and ashes. And Esther finds out about it. She's the queen now. Mordecai, what's going on? And Mordecai says, Esther, you're the only one that can do anything about this. Talk to the king. This is what we talked about a few weeks ago in chapter 4. Esther's reluctant. She's reluctant because she may have fallen out of favor with the king a little bit. He hasn't called for her in a while. And to walk into the king's presence without being invited is a crime, punishable by death and immediate execution. So she's nervous. Yet Mordecai pushes her, presses her, and he says, Esther, who knows but that you were created for such a time as this. And Esther, at the end of chapter 4, agrees to go talk to the king, but not before calling a 3-day fast. And that's where we pick up at the beginning of chapter 5. It says, on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace. So let me show you scene 1. We just read it, Esther 5, 1 through 8. What do we see? Esther shows us 2 things, bold faith and humble wisdom. Bold faith took boldness to walk into the king uninvited, but she also shows us humble wisdom. And the combination of those 2 things is important. Why? Well, because some people are bold, but they have no wisdom. Some people are wise, but they have no boldness. The problem is, boldness without wisdom is reckless. And wisdom without boldness is feckless. It's impotent. It doesn't accomplish anything. And so Esther shows us the combination of the 2, wisdom and boldness. And let's see how she exercises both. First, Esther prepared herself before God. I want you to see this. Before she goes to the king, she goes to the King of Kings. Yeah, before she goes to see Xerxes, she fasts and prays for 3 days. What's she doing? I would imagine that she's seeking not just boldness from the Lord, but she's seeking wisdom from the Lord. Strategy from the Lord. Lord, I know you've called me to this moment. What am I to do? What am I to say? How should I approach? What does it need to look like? I really believe this is not just a symbolic fasting and prayer that she's doing in order to kind of twist the Lord's arm. I think these 3 days are Esther and all the people saying, Lord, we need your mind on this. We need your wisdom on this. We need you to move in us and through us. And that's a good reminder for all of us who are believers that prayer should be our first response, not our last resort. Because oftentimes it is, right? We encounter a situation, a circumstance, and instead of going to God first, what do? We run to fight the fight, or have the conversation, or get into the battle. But in reality, Esther is instructive for us. Before you go talk to your boss, you ought to talk to the Lord. Before you go talk to your employee, you ought to talk to the Lord. Before you have that conversation with your husband or your wife, you ought to talk to the Lord. Before you deal with your kids and all their craziness, you ought to talk to the Lord. Prayer should be our first response, not our last resort. Why? Because in prayer, we can get the mind of God about a situation. We can get the strategy of God. We can get the thinking and the positioning of God. Remember, his ways are higher than our ways. And if I don't feel up to the task, if my ways seem insufficient, then I need to go to the Lord and see if I can get a handle on his ways in this circumstance. And so she prepares herself before God. But she didn't just prepare herself before God. Number two, she also honored the protocols of the palace. She honored the context that God had placed her in. And there's wisdom in this. This is where I say we see her wisdom. She is on a mission from God. I thought about this old movie, Forgive. I've got several pop culture references today. But the first one is, I thought about this movie, dumb movie, you don't need to go watch it. It's from the 80s, it's called The Blues Brothers. And if you'll remember, some of y'all seen the movie. Dumb movie, you don't need to go watch it. I'll just tell you about this scene. Anyway, when they're putting their band back together, kind of all the guys have gone on to live different lives and do different things. And so what these two primary blues brothers do is they bust into all these circumstances and they say, we're putting the band back together. And whenever people say, oh no, I can't, I've moved on, done this, they say, we're on a mission from God. That's what they say. It's over and over. It's about a 4-minute montage of them busting into places and saying, we're on a mission from God. Well, Esther really is on a mission from God, and yet she doesn't just bust up in the king's hall. Right? The fact that she is called to this mission does not, in her mind at least, give her permission to just ignore palace protocol. She honors the context that God has placed her in. Why? Because had she not, mission from God or not, it would have cost her her life. And then she wouldn't have had a mission to fulfill. And so what does she do? She dresses to impress. She puts on her royal robes, as a queen would when she goes to the king's hall. And that's not an inconsequential detail, because it says when the king saw her she's not even in the room yet. He sees her way outside the hall. It says he was pleased with her when he saw her. And he invites her in. He extends the scepter. She walks in. She doesn't walk in casually. She doesn't walk in shaking other people's hands. She walks in with her eyes on the king. She walks all the way to the king. He extends his scepter. She touches the scepter. And now permission to speak. There's all kinds of protocol happening here. And even though she was on a mission from God, she did not ignore the protocol. And now she's in. And the king says, Esther, what do you want? I'll give you anything, even up to half the kingdom. Now, he wasn't going to give her half the kingdom. It was just a way of saying, like the old movie, you want the moon? I'll give you the moon. He's saying, I'll give you anything you want, Esther. You just need to ask. And yet, she doesn't say. She doesn't ask, save my people. She says instead, I want you to come to a feast that I've prepared for you. It's already ready. Right now, invite Haman. There's wisdom here. There's strategy here. What's she doing? She's serving the king. She needs something from him, but before she asks for what she needs from him, she does something for him. You want favor at your job? Make yourself invaluable at your job. There's also, and obviously the Lord is a much better king than Xerxes, but there's also some, I think, worship protocol involved in this, that when we come to the Lord, we come first with him in mind, not us. Because we, like Esther, we have all kinds of needs. And some of them are urgent. Some of them may be life-threatening. And so if we're not careful, we'll just ignore protocol and we'll just bust in. And of course we can come boldly, just as she does. However, when we come to the Lord, we ought to come with thanksgiving. We ought to come with bringing him glory. It's him first. And can I tell you, if you will bring him glory first, then you can ask whatever you need. Of course, Jesus said in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. But he didn't say that before. He said, hallowed be your name. And now the Pentecostal in me doesn't like that because we think when we feel it, we just disrupt everything. But the reality is I can get very me-centered and forget that all of this is God's story. I'm just playing a part in it. Yeah? There was a young man that was coming to church a few months ago, and a bit disruptive, and one of the team just like, hey, what's going on? And he said, God sent me here to disrupt. And we said, no, he didn't. Hey, we're called to disrupt the plans of the enemy, but you're not called to just be a disruptor everywhere you go. You just bust up in every room, disrupting nobody's going to give you a chance to hear about the Lord you serve. What does she do? She's wise. And it takes great boldness to do what she's going to do, but she does it with significant wisdom. She serves him. She honors protocol. What do we learn from Esther? We learn, again, bold faith and humble wisdom. Here's what Jesus said in Matthew 10:16. He said, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be two things. Shrewd as snakes, you may remember it, wise as serpents, and as innocent or harmless as doves. Now that's sweet Jesus. And he's telling you, be as wise as a snake, but be as harmless as a dove. What does that mean? I think it's a picture of bold faith and humble wisdom. Shrewd as snakes. It doesn't mean being evil, being manipulative, being dishonest, but it does mean having discernment and using wisdom. A couple of examples would be knowing when to speak and knowing when you ought to shut up. That's a good one. I could learn that. The Lord's paying me back. Grant, he told me the other day, I got on to him about something. I said, Grant, you need to be a better listener. He told me, he said, well, you've been goofing around all day. And I'm like, hey. You're 4, man. You can't tell me. I sound like my dad reincarnated. I was like, Lord told me I've been goofing around. And it was so good and it happened so fast, I just let him get the whole thing out because he just kept going about what all I'd done wrong. And it's kind of funny to me because I know where he gets it from. I did let him finish, and then I said, get over here and let me spank your butt. And he ran. Wise as serpents, know when to speak, know when to be quiet. Be strategic about timing and methods. Just because it's the Lord's will don't mean it's the Lord's time. And you may not know his method just yet. Be as wise as a serpent. Understand the protocols, the context of the environment you're in. Don't get fired from your job trying to witness to people all day. Witness to people all day. But honor the context that God has put you in. Who's going to reach your employees if you disregard your work and get fired? Honor, be wise. Be wise. That's what Jesus is saying. Be wise. But don't just be as shrewd as a snake. Be as innocent as a dove. What does that mean? Be pure-hearted. No malice, no deceit, no wrong motives, right? You give and you respond with love and integrity, even when people show you something different. And here's where the power is. It's in the balance of those two things. The genius is in the word and. Okay? Be shrewd as a snake and be as innocent as a dove. Because you can be shrewd and become cynical and manipulative and harsh. Or you can be innocent as a dove and become naive and silly and taken advantage of. The genius is be bold in your faith, but be humble in your wisdom. And that's what Esther shows us. Now, the scene changes quite dramatically. Sermon 2, Esther 5:9-14. Haman warns us that pride leads to destruction. Let's read about that. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh his wife, Haman boasted to them about here's pride on display. He boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave today. And she's invited me along with the king to another banquet tomorrow. Verse 13, but all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, that's about 75 feet, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Proverbs 18 says, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit goes before a fall. And there are some natural ways that pride goes before destruction. I want to give you two of them. These are not exhaustive, but it's what we see here. Number one, pride goes before destruction because pride distorts our vision. We don't see things as they actually are when we're filled with pride. We see everything through the wrong lens. Think about this. Haman has been elevated to number 2 in one of the greatest empires in the history of the world. He is, all the things he's boasting about, he is those things. He is rich. He is powerful. He is somebody important, so important and so powerful, he can declare that on some date at the end of the year, we're going to kill all these people, and everybody goes with it. It becomes law. Haman is not a nobody with an inflated ego. He's a somebody who has a distorted view of the world. And what we see is, as honored as he is, as powerful as he is, as wealthy as he is, as many sons and homes and things that he has, he says in verse 13, none of it satisfies me. As long as Mordecai is not afraid of me. As long as Mordecai won't bow. Think about it. He's all of these things, and one man that doesn't show fear has taken over and consumed his whole being. You're out of alignment, Haman. This shouldn't bother you. Why has this possessed you and taken over your mind? Why? Because pride steals our joy. You can't even enjoy what you have when you're full of pride because some little thing that doesn't go your way makes you not even be satisfied with all the things that have gone your way. That's why prideful people typically aren't happy people. And you would look at them and say, man, you've got it all. You've got a good life. You've got a good family. You've got a house. You've got this, that, and the other. But one little offense, one thing that doesn't go their way, one person they can't control, and none of it matters. Why? Because of pride. They're not happy. It looks like power. It projects like strength. But what it is, pride is weakness. Most of the time, prideful people are deeply insecure and deeply suspicious people. And that's Haman. And his distorted view, his weird take on all of this stuff makes him number 2. It makes him reckless. Pride makes him reckless. Haman, because of his pride, is one overreaction after another. He's elevated to number 2 in the kingdom. One guy won't bow. Hey, he could have that one guy killed. Could just be done today. But instead, he says, let's kill all of his people. Overreaction. Now, he's been honored. The only other guest of honor at a palace thrown at a feast thrown by the queen for the king and him. And yet, he can't even enjoy that honor because Mordecai's not afraid of him. It takes over his being. So what does he do? He could just have Mordecai killed. And he intends to. But not just in an ordinary way. He says, let's raise a pole. In the Persian Empire, they wouldn't hang people the way we think of hanging in the West. They would impale people on a pole. It's as bad as you would imagine. But typically, those poles were just high enough to get somebody up off the ground. Haman could have just done what they do. But pride makes us reckless. He overreacts. He says, I'm going to kill this guy, but I'm going to hoist him 75 feet in the air. I'm going to make an example of him. I'm going to show everybody in the citadel of Susa what happens to people when you're not afraid and you don't respect and you don't bow to Haman. Made him reckless. It's an overreaction. And so natural downfalls of pride. Distorts your vision, makes you reckless. But the greatest downfall of pride is not a natural thing, it's a supernatural thing. The greatest downfall of pride is the fact that when you are filled with pride, it invites the opposition of God to your life. And let me just tell you, everybody, if you think the devil is a bad enemy, the Lord is a worse enemy. James 4:6, in case you think I'm making it up, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Haman's coming down, and God is going to, he's going up. And God is going to make sure of it. That verse could really be the whole theme of this book. God opposes the proud, Haman, shows grace to the humble, Esther, and Mordecai. So see this. Pride goes before destruction. Why? Well, there's some natural reasons. But the greatest downfall of pride is supernatural. That it brings the opposition of God. It positions us not with, but against the one who can humble us in a moment. That's what it does for Haman. It positions him for humiliation. And God himself makes sure of it. So what do we learn about pride from Haman? Well, I would just say that all of us, no matter how saved we are, have to battle pride in our heart. And so examine your heart and fight the fight against pride. I would really strongly encourage you this week to set aside some time, maybe today before you get in the busyness of the rest of the week, set aside some time and pray with the psalmist and say, Lord, search me, know me, show me anything in me that is unlike you. And here's the thing, he will. And if you come away from that prayer thinking, I'm good, there it is. Right? Search me, know me, show me. You ought to pray that every day. Lord, search me, know me, show me. And, James 4:6 is a scary verse. God opposes the proud. It's a warning. But it's also an invitation. He shows favor. He shows grace to the humble. It's not just a warning against pride, it's an invitation to step into humility. C.S. Lewis said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. It's going back to week 1 of this series that this is not my story. We tend to think this is all my story. I'm the center of the universe. No. This is God's story. And we just play a small part in his story. And if we can get that squared away, it will keep us from inflating ourselves with pride. And so Esther's wisdom and boldness, Haman's pride, and then in scene 3, we see God's perfect timing. We're going to read Esther, the entirety of Esther 6, and it's entertaining. That night, the king could not sleep. So they're after one feast, got another feast tomorrow. The king can't sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Pause. Go back to Esther 2. Mordecai saves the king's life. You would think they throw Mordecai a party. They don't. The only thing that happens, and Mordecai may not even be aware that this happened, is it says, all of this was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. And so now, this is 4 or 5 years later, the king can't sleep. He calls in a reader, and what do you think the reader is reading? What was written 5 years earlier in Esther 2:23 about Mordecai saving the king's life. And the king Xerxes says, what honor and recognition has Mordecai? He saved my life. What have we done for him? Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, who's in the court right now? Now Haman had just entered the court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Pride distorts our vision. Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Haman thinks he's planning his own parade. And so he goes big. Do it all. Just do everything you can imagine doing. That a guy like that, you got to go big, king. Don't shortchange that guy. Verse 10, go at once, the king commanded Haman. Gets the king charged up. He says, that's great. We need to do all of that. Go get the robe and the horse, and you do just as you have suggested for... He's there to ask the king, can you let me kill Mordecai? I've already got a pole set up in my yard. It won't take much doing. I won't even be late for the banquet. And the king says, everything you've just described, you be that noble prince who robes Mordecai, puts him on a horse, and leads the parade through the city shouting, this is what is done for a man the king delights to honor. He says, don't neglect anything you've recommended. So Haman got the robe. Don't you know he's mad? And the horse. He robed Mordecai, led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him through gritted teeth, right? This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. It's like one more time, Haman with feeling. We don't believe you. Afterward, Mordecai, and I love this. This is the humility of Mordecai. He's just had a parade. He's been wearing the king's robe, riding on the king's horse, all through the city. What does he do afterward? Mordecai went back to the king's gate. He went back to work. It's like, my shift's starting. But Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. He's humiliated. Pride goes before a fall, right? He told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, now remember, they're the ones that told him, build a big pole in your yard. But now their song is changed. Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet that Esther had prepared. I want you to remember the big idea of this whole series, and that's this. In Esther, we discover the invisible hand of God quietly directing history. God's never explicitly mentioned in this book. Even when it says they fasted, it doesn't say they prayed. We fill in the gaps. Because God is not explicit, but he is implied everywhere. And what we see is the invisible hand of God quietly directing history, orchestrating people and events to accomplish his perfect purposes. John Nelson Darby said it this way, that God is behind the scenes, moving all of the scenes he's behind. And here in this chapter, we see a little bit of how God moves the scenes. First, God often works through coincidences. As C.S. Lewis said, coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. Just think about all of the coincidences that happened just in this chapter. After the first banquet, the king can't sleep. What a coincidence. So he calls for someone to come in and read the Chronicles of Persia. Simple enough. Sounds like it would put you right to sleep. The reader covers the section about Mordecai saving the king's life. What a coincidence. The king realizes he's never honored Mordecai for saving his life. What a coincidence. The king goes looking for somebody who can honor Mordecai. What a coincidence. Haman runs in right at the moment. Who's here? Haman's here. What a coincidence. I'm reminded of the old song, wise men say, only fools rush in. Here comes Haman rushing in. The king asks Haman, how do you honor a man who's worthy of great honor? Because pride has distorted his vision, he assumes the king's talking about himself. What a coincidence. He describes elaborate honor worthy of a king. What a coincidence. Then the king orders Haman, do all of the above for Mordecai. The guy you were coming, he doesn't know this, but the guy he's coming to have killed. What a coincidence. More than that, what a turn of events. Haman came in ready to kill the guy. Now he's leading the honor parade for the guy. I'm reminded of a quote from Michael Scott from The Office. He says, how the turntables. You got to watch The Office to get that. But if I was a preacher, here's what I'd preach. That God is still the God of the turnaround. That he is the same God today as he was in Esther 6. And so I've been trying to get here the whole time. I don't know what's come against you. I don't know who's been plotting your demise, who's been plotting your marriage's demise. I don't know who's been coming against your kids or your money. But here's what I know. The same God that turned the tables for Mordecai can turn the tables for you. I just wonder if there's anybody in the room with just a little bit of faith who can say, I believe, as bad as it looks right now, that God can turn the tables in my favor. There's a shifting in my direction. Come on, I can't sing it, but you know what I'm saying. There is a turning, there is a shifting, there is a moving. I just believe God's gonna turn some tables for you, Jeremy. I believe God's already turned some tables for you, John. I just believe that God can turn the table. I know it looks bad. I know you've been grieving. I know you've been worried about the future. But in a moment, God can keep somebody awake. God can put your name on their lips. God can change everything in a moment. And he may wait till it gets real bad to do it. But he can do it like that. He don't need a lot of time. He just will do it at the right time. He's still, you ought to look at your neighbor and say, he's going to turn it around. He's going to turn it around. Adrian, God's got something for you, man. He's going to turn it around. I just believe God's going to work in your favor. I believe what you thought was a setback is going to be a setup for a comeback. I heard somebody preach that when I was a teenager. What you thought was a setback was a setup for a comeback. Come on, just say, Lord, turn the table. Lord, turn the table for my kids, for my money, for my marriage, for my business, come on, somebody, Lord, turn the tables in my favor. And here's the thing. Sit down, because that's not the end. Told you I got 3 whole sermons. So said God works through coincidences. Just after the first service, somebody came and told me, they said, man, had a tough conversation with my boss, and they're cutting back. You know, problem with sales jobs is if you're good at sales, they want to give you less money. And so that's happening to this guy. And he said, man, we had this tough conversation. We're going back and forth, and it doesn't look good. He said, and then the next day, another company reached out to me, and if I get that job, my base pay goes up, my percentage goes up. And he said, you just preached about coincidences. He said, these people have never reached out to me, but I have a hard conversation with my current job one day, another company reaches out the next day. Look at God turning the table. I just believe that he's been more active than we've given him credit for. What we thought were coincidences was God turning the tables in our favor. Woo! So he uses coincidences, but watch this. He also honors faithfulness in his time. He honors faithfulness in his time. Remember, Mordecai saved the king's life 5 years ago. It would have been natural to expect some kind of honor from the king back then. A little thank you note. Don't need a parade, just a, hey man, I really appreciate you saving my life. But now, 5 years later, Mordecai thinks he's the only one that knows about that. It's been unseen. It's been unrewarded. I wonder how many times Mordecai sat at the king's gate and watched Xerxes go by. It would have been only human to think, he didn't even say thank you. Oh, but his thank you was coming. If he'd have spent it too early, it wouldn't have been there at the right night. Everybody else forgot. God didn't forget. And when the time was right, the Lord caused the official record to open to the right place at the right time. Think about this. Mordecai couldn't get into the king's bedroom. Mordecai couldn't get in there and say, King, they're about to kill me. You know I saved your life. However, the Lord got him in that room. His name was in a book that hadn't been opened in years, and yet on the night before he would lose his life, the Lord said, read that passage right there. Read that, say that name right there. I wonder whose lips your name has been on. I wonder what rooms you've been in that you don't even realize you've been in. I wonder what they're saying about you in the HR department at work. I wonder what your boss is saying. I wonder if you're next in line for the promotion. God can put you in rooms that you've never walked in. God can give you people with favor when you think everybody's overlooked and unrewarded what you've done. He honors faithfulness in his time. And so we learn from Esther, we learn from Haman. Here's what we learn about God and about ourselves. We must, as believers, be faithful every day and trust God's timing. If they didn't acknowledge you yet, just know God will acknowledge you later. It's a good reminder for us. God sees what other people miss. God remembers what other people forget. God moves at his perfect time, not our preferred time. I'd like for him to do it like a while ago. But God may know something about the future. I don't know. And he may need to use that right then for a purpose. So keep doing the right thing, even when nobody notices. Don't get caught up in thinking, man, they don't even see what I do. They don't even know what I give. Don't rush ahead of God. Don't lose heart in the waiting. Trust that God still honors unseen faithfulness in his time. Mordecai woke up and was headed to work. And something he thought everybody else had forgotten about caused him on this day, seemingly randomly, to be wrapped in the king's robe, sat on the king's horse, and paraded through the city by the guy that wanted to kill him. God's timing is perfect. It's perfect. Let's end with verse 13. Just want to revisit that one. Haman gets home. He's humiliated. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. And just a minute ago, yesterday, they were telling him, kill that guy. Hang him high. Now you cannot stand against him. It's going to backfire, Haman. You will surely come to ruin. It's interesting because these people weren't God's people. And yet they made a true faith statement about God. They said, you cannot stand against him. How did they get so confident? How did they find that conviction even if they didn't worship that God? Maybe, and this is just me, maybe they'd heard the stories. Think about Daniel in the lion's den. You know, the king in that story was this king's grandpa. That wasn't, maybe their parents told them that story growing up, bedtime stories. Let me tell you about a man that got thrown. That's the makings of a good bedtime story. Maybe they'd heard the stories. And maybe now, all of a sudden, they're connecting the dots. Daniel served that same God. And maybe they're starting to notice that everything before was coming up Haman. Now Haman's humiliated and everything's coming up Mordecai. It looks Haman like God is turning the tables. You cannot stand against him. Here's the conclusion they came to. When you set yourself up against the people of God, you set yourself up against the God of the people, and you cannot stand against him. He is greater, he is stronger, he is more powerful. He cannot be withstood. It reminds me of the verse in Romans 8:31. What then shall we say in response to these things? What things? I don't know. You fill in the blank. What things have come against you? What things have come against your mind or your marriage? What shall we say in response to that sickness? What shall we say in response to that dysfunction? What shall we say in response to that anxiety? What shall we say in response to that lack? Here's what we say: if God is for us, who can be against us? Haman, he's God's man. You cannot stand against the God of that man. Come on, God's people, have a little more confidence that your God is going before you and fighting battles that you don't even realize yet. Would you stand with me all over the room? That's my prayer more and more. Lord, go before me. Go before me. Go into rooms I haven't walked in yet. Go into seasons that I haven't stepped in yet. Make the crooked places straight. Make the low places high. Make the high places low. Lord, you go before me. You fight for me. There's some of us, we're so worried about what might happen 5 years from now or 1 year from now. Maybe you've got a diagnosis and you're afraid. Maybe you got kids and they're going nuts. Can I tell you, God can go 3 months into your future. He can start fighting a battle before you ever get there. He can go 6 months out, 1 year out, 10 years out. And the enemy cannot stand against him. Don't believe the lie that your enemy is as great as your God. When your God gets ready to turn the tables, he does it in a moment as if there's no enemy to resist him. We give the devil more credit than he deserves. He's not God. And I just want to remind you that the same God who turned the tables for Mordecai is still a table-turning God. You know, when we read, especially Old Testament, it could be easy to think, oh, well, man, we're reading a story about some foreign God. No, this is our God. Same God in this room right now. Same God whose spirit is filling up so many of us in the room. The same God. And he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. If he did it then, he can do it now. He came through for his people then. He'll come through for his people now. He always has. He always will.